In early 2014, I joined an organized rail photographers tour that included 2 shortlines in Oregon. The first stop was Prineville, Oregon, a pleasant city near Bend. Known as the home of the Les Schwab Tire Company, Apple and Facebook are now big employers in the community. It is best known to the railroad community for the City of Prineville Railway, which features on the city's logo. The city-owned short line was once so profitable that no municipal property taxes were levied for several years, although it has now fallen on harder times. Our locomotive for the day was Mount Emily Lumber Company's No. 3, a 1923-built 3-truck shay. We took the locomotive out on the line, and as there was no other traffic, were able to pose the locomotive in the most scenic spots all day long. A stop for water was made at a convenient creek. We had been using the 1943-built caboose as a rider car, but this has now been donated to the local museum. Future trips will be a little more difficult. Soon it was time to put the locomotive away for the day. The next morning, we were off to the second location, the Sumpter Valley Railway. Our journey took us along Highway 26 on the Journey Through Time Scenic Byway, which is known for its fossil beds and badlands, somewhat similar to the Alberta Badlands. We passed through the less than thriving village of Mitchell. Later, we reached Dayville, somewhat more prosperous and tidy, followed by the town of John Day, both taking their name from the John Day River, which in turn was named for an early Oregon explorer. I've never been able to find out if he was related to me. The Sumpter Valley Railway was built to 3-foot gauge by logging interests starting in 1890. Sumpter was a location of gold dredging operations, and the big dredge survives today in the village of Sumpter. It took until 1910 to reach the westernmost point, Prairie City, although abandonment started in 1933. 1940 saw the arrival of the 2 massive 2662T Malays from the Uintah Railway. On the Sumpter Valley, they lost their side tanks and received tenders. These were the biggest engines to ever work on the narrow gauge in the U.S., and in their Uintah form are very popular as models. As war came to the USA, some of the smaller locomotives were moved to the White Pass in Yukon. After the railroad was abandoned in 1947, much of the equipment was sold off. The big Malays went to Guatemala. The heritage operation started up in 1971, with Heisler No. 3 being brought back to the line from storage in Idaho. 2 of the locomotives that went to Alaska were returned to Sumpter, and were reunited with their tenders, which had gone to Guatemala with the big Malays. The line runs for about 7 miles between McEwen and Sumpter. Arriving mid-afternoon, I found both the Heisler and the restored Alco-built Mikado No. 19 in steam. This was the first ever operation of the restored Sumpter Valley line. In winter, 19 was dispatched up the line to clear snow from the tracks and ice from the grade crossings. And a lot of hard work was needed to clear the crossings. I had what amounted to a private showing with the locomotive attempting to clear the drifted snow from the grade leading up to the Sumpter station. Early the next morning, the group assembled at McEwen as 2 trains were being readied for a day of photography. A light snowfall freshened things up a bit, but the day was really mixed with periods of sun interspersed with dark clouds. The clouds lifted enough to give us some great shots of the Elkhorn Mountains. Night was very cold with just a few quick shots taken after dark. Next day was bright and sunny, and we repeated our photography, the engines having been wide at McEwen, the only turning facility on the line. Towards the end of the day, one of the cabooses was derailed on the grade leading to Sumpter station. Several members of our group were aboard at the time, and although it did remain upright, it gave everyone a bit of a scare, as it could easily have rolled down the embankment. 2 days provided a lot of opportunities for photography, and the next morning we moved on. I had learned of plans to include the Oregon Coast Scenic Railroad in an autumn leaves photo shoot, so October 2014 found me in Garibaldi, Oregon, on Tillamook Bay. In addition to stunning coastal scenery, Tillamook is famous for its cheese and dairy products and is also home to an air museum centered around a large wartime blimp hangar built almost entirely of wood. The railroad to Tillamook was built to move forest products to market. The Southern Pacific sold the line to Port of Tillamook Bay Railroad, which in turn has leased part of the line to Oregon Coast Scenic. Part of the line was washed out in 2007 and the port abandoned operations, so now the Scenic Railway is the only user of the track, and there is strong public pressure to convert the entire railroad to a rail trail. The passenger trains are largely confined to the Garibaldi Rockaway Beach section. Occasionally trains run as far as Wheeler, and once a year they travel up the Nehalem River to Batterson. But on the charters that I was on, we were able to get almost to the end of track at Salmonberry, as well as south almost to Tillamook, so I've covered almost all of the active track on the railroad. On the first day, we'd been told to join the train at Wheeler, as there was insufficient time to get a train to Salmonberry and back, as well as allowing for time for photography in a single day. The Nehalem River Bridge and trestle is a fairly substantial affair, the steel bridge having been built for the Central Pacific's Truckee River crossing before being relocated to the Tillamook branch. Although the day was cloudy with some rain, we got some great pictures up in the woods, away from traffic and tourists. For our second day, we stayed closer to Garibaldi, starting out with some early morning shots along the seashore and Smith Lake, followed by some great shots on the trestles over the marsh near Wheeler. In the early afternoon of the second day, the crew declared the locomotive out of service due to a hot bearing. As it was clear photography was over for the day, that essentially ended the trip. In 2018, word went round that a 3-locomotive event was being planned. Not only would the main locomotive, ex-McLeod River Railroad number 25, be joined by Saginaw Timber number 2, a large Mikado, but also the famous Little River 2442, Skookum, was nearing the end of its restoration and would be in steam. Skookum had been built for a logging railway in Tennessee, but was too heavy for their bridges, so was sold to a succession of logging companies in Oregon and Washington. In 1955, the locomotive derailed and overturned, and was abandoned where it lay by the owners. It was bought for preservation by a group from the museum at Snoqualmie Falls, and it was here that I first encountered this locomotive in many pieces on a West Coast Railway Association tour in 1966. I never expected to see it in steam again. Arriving in Garibaldi, I found Skookum sitting in the autumn sunshine in steam. Unfortunately, when the locomotive was moved, one of the main rods buckled and put the locomotive out of commission. It was, however, able to pose for static photos in steam for us one last time. The previous day's sunshine was replaced by thick fog the next morning, which gave some interesting photographic challenges. sun didn't appear until late in the day. Fortunately, the following day was better, with more time spent back at the marshes near Wheeler, as well as at the trestle over the slough near Tillamook. One last shot involved posing the locomotive at Barview, adjacent to the sea stacks known as the Three Graces. The warm evening sun sank slowly into the sea and provided a great ending to a couple of days' photography on this interesting line.